Hi guys, I'm Oliver Lundy. I'm an automotive photographer from the UK. This is part 2 of my video on why or does gear matter. And in the first part I covered sort of the general arguments and all the things that you can do with your photography that don't involve having to buy new gear, or all the things that don't involve gear at all. So go back, watch that one, and then come back and watch this one. If you've already watched that one, welcome back. And in this one, I'm going to be covering all the things that do matter with gear. Some of them are kind of not the common stuff that you would think of, and a lot of beginners don't really know this stuff. So I'm going to cover as much as I can, and yeah, let's get cracking. So guys, lenses. This is the first one, and it's probably the biggest of all of them. And the reason why lenses are so important, out of all the gear, everybody overlooks lenses. Everyone gets obsessed with camera bodies. And don't get me wrong, we're going to cover camera bodies later on, but before we get to that, we need to address lenses, because lenses are so massive. So the first thing about lenses is the field of view, which is just whether or not you're shooting a wide lens or a really telephoto lens, is going to affect what you can and can't shoot with whatever camera it is that you actually have. So if, for example, you're trying to shoot your kids' sports days, then turning up with a wide angle lens is only going to get, when you'll get the whole field in the shot, but each individual person will be tiny in the frame. And it's the same as if you turn up with a giant telephoto lens and what you're trying to shoot is a portrait. You're going to have to be 200 yards away from them to get them completely in the frame. So having the right lens for the right job is absolutely massive. But more than that, everybody gets obsessed with bodies, like I said, and the lenses is what makes the biggest difference. If you put a cheap, rubbish, plasticky lens, and I mean plastic as in the actual lens elements inside are plastic, then no matter how good a body you put it on, it's going to be dull, the colors aren't going to be good, it's not going to have good contrast, and it's not going to have good sharpness in comparison to a full glass lens and a more expensive, higher end lens, which basically is manufactured to have better optical quality. So if you were to take two photos, one with a basic camera with a really good lens and one with a pro camera but with a really budget lens, the shot with the better lens is almost certainly going to be sharper, with greater contrast and better color. So assuming that all other things are the same. So don't overlook lenses. If you can, and if you're talking about what to spend your money on and what to spend your budget on, focus more on lenses than on the camera body. Work out what it is you're going to be shooting, what kind of lenses you need to shoot that thing, whether or not you're going to go with zooms or primes, how many you're going to get, and how much your total budget is, and then you've got to factor in how many lenses, more so than just the camera body. I hope that makes sense. Just learn to love lenses. Okay guys, so lighting. It's the second biggest thing after you've learned manual, is to learn lighting, and photography is literally a translation of painting with light. And if you've only ever shot in natural light, then whilst that can be a wonderful thing, and learning how to get the most out of natural light, as I talked about in the last video, that shooting at golden hour and really making the most out of natural light is a way of getting really good results for free, in that if you can make relatively mediocre situations look really, really good by using or shooting at the right times of day and using golden hour light. But equally, you can take a really awesome situation and put really dull natural light in, and it's really difficult. It's going to look flat and quite boring. So lighting. So what do you do when you want to step your game up with lighting? Well, my suggestion is to do two things. One is get yourself a speed light. Any speed light, doesn't have to be an expensive one, just a basic one that you can start learning how to use artificial light with a speed gun. You can use it to light up backgrounds, you can use it to actually flash and paint a car with light using flash, and it will open up situations that you wouldn't have been able to shoot in before because you just ran out of light. So That's number one. Number two is get yourself an LED light panel of some description. The one that I use is the Young New Light Wand, and it's a really, really good light. And the advantage of using LED light panels is that you can see where the light is hitting and how intense it is whilst you're, just by turning it on, and then you can shape whatever light you want and the situation you want, then go back and just take your shot when you're ready. So these two things will open up all sorts of possibilities for you that you just can't do without them. And the primary one that I use the Young New Light Wand for is light painting, and light painting is awesome. I'm going to put up a whole bunch of images now that were all light painted with this basic LED light wand. So as you can see, you can get some really, really awesome results from relatively basic equipment, but you've got to get it and you've got to start learning how to use artificial light. And you can go down a rabbit hole with this stuff, and you can get studio strobes, you can get multiple light sources, you can do multiple video lights, you can do all sorts of things with lighting, and it's almost as much to learn again as it is to learn the basics of photography, but it is really worth it, and it can be, and quite often is, the thing that separates a mediocre photographer from a really good photographer. Okay guys, so the next thing about gear, and this really does matter, is reliability. Now, how reliable your gear needs to be is going to depend on what you're shooting, whether you're doing it as a hobby or as a pro, what kind of situations you're putting it through, whether that's going to be adverse and difficult weather or dusty and sandy conditions, or whether it's you're turning up to a photo shoot where there's multiple other factors. So you've got an art director turning up, you've got a client turning up, you've got multiple cars turning up, and a lot of money has gone into putting this photo shoot together, and then you turn up and your gear lets you down. That's going to be awful. That's going to be absolutely catastrophic for your career. They're never going to want to work with you again. So you've got to have the most reliable gear that you can get your hands on, but B, you've also got to have backups. So this partly is how reliable are you as the photographer, and that's going to include having backup camera bodies and backup lighting and backup memory cards, backup batteries, so that no matter what happens in the photo shoot, if your gear is normally reliable but just happens to let you down on that one session, then you've got backups. Now, I was on a shoot where there was a photographer there, he had a pro body and loads of pro lenses, and during the shoot he accidentally dropped his camera, the lens got stuck on his body and wouldn't work, and he couldn't get it off, and he didn't have anything else. He was done for the rest of the shoot, and it was awful for him. So have backups, and also try and get the most reliable gear you can. Now, in the modern world, any of the major brands, so Canon, Nikon, Sony, Fuji, probably missing some, but those are the main ones, are gonna give you, reliable gear that should be dependable. So if you're just a hobbyist and you're starting out, just having a reliable camera is all you need to do to get going. But as you level up and as you start taking on more and more higher level paid work, you need to level up not only your gear, but also the redundancy that you have should something go wrong. Now, part of that is that most of the main brands have like a professional services version. I think Canon, it's called Canon Professional Services, and all it is it's something that you sign up to once you've got enough gear to qualify, and they will repair gear quickly and send you replacements as loans whilst yours is being repaired, so that if the worst happens and something breaks, you don't have to then go, oh right, well, I'm out, I can't shoot now for months until my gear comes back. And it also means you don't have to rent gear, which could be expensive, to cover that whole kind of period. So look into professional services if you haven't already and you're doing professional stuff, and try to stick to the major brands. Try to avoid anything kind of massively off-brand or really, really old. Now, if you're starting out, old gear is a great way to get a nice camera that you can use to step your game up. But just be aware that as cameras get older and older and older, they can start letting you down, buttons can start failing, the doors on memory card, hatches and things like that can go. So just be aware that if you're buying used gear, it's not necessarily going to be as reliable as something brand new. Okay, so the other settings that you're going to need to think about are things like what's your frames per second. So if you're shooting a lot of motorsport or action, you're going to want as higher frames per second as you can get, because as you're panning and you're taking your shots, you've got way more chances to get the shot that you're after if you've got higher frames per second. And then how good the autofocus tracking is. Again, the modern sort of mirrorless camera bodies have got really, really good tracking, but the older sort of DSLR generation, some of them, the higher end stuff, had really good tracking, but the basic entry level stuff really doesn't, so you're gonna potentially struggle there. So again, it's just about finding out what features matter for the type of photography that you're doing, and then doing your research on the individual bodies and making sure that the camera that you're looking at buying, or the camera that you're gonna get, is actually strong in those areas before you go off and spend loads of money and it's not actually gonna help you because it's not how you shoot. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so another thing, guys, people tend to get quite caught up in just the camera and the lenses and sometimes even lighting, but forget a lot of the other stuff. Now I'm talking about all the auxiliary stuff, all the non-camera stuff. So I'm talking about your bags, your memory cards, your batteries, the trolley that you might use, the clothing that you're going to wear on specific shoots, all sorts of stuff that really does make a difference to your experience and how good your results are going to be. And if you're a landscape photographer, you go out in winter to try and get some really good stuff, and then you end up having to bail on it really, really quickly because you're just too cold. Then, you know, these are things that you've got to think about as a photographer, especially if you're going to be doing automotive, because there's a lot of extra bits and pieces that you're going to need to pay attention to. So you're going to need a circular polarizer as an absolute minimum. You're going to want your few different lenses. You're going to want your camera body. You're going to want a bag that's going to be big enough to fit all your gear, but it's going to fit in the storage space of some of the more less practical supercars out there, maybe. You're also going to want a way of keeping everything nice and easy, so that when you're doing run and gun style shoots, it's one bag that you can grab and you know you've got everything that you need, and then you have a different bag with all your other stuff in it, you know, the stuff that you might not necessarily take on every shoot or that you don't need for everything. And then you know that if you're gonna take everything, you've got both bags. If not, you can just grab the one that's got everything that you need, and then you can go. So just don't forget that, don't neglect all the other stuff just because you're only focused on the camera. The amount of times that I've seen photographers turn up to photo shoots and they've only got one memory card and they fill it up and they're done. Or they've only got one battery and it runs out and then they can't do anything else. So just make sure that you've got all of your kind of backup or your tertiary stuff sorted, and that it won't let you down as the photographer. Okay guys, let's do it. Let's talk about the big one. What camera are you gonna use? Now, branding wise, it doesn't really matter what you're using. As long as you're using one of the bigger brands, they all make really, really good cameras these days, and it's more about finding the right camera for you and what you do and what you shoot, rather than just buying the best thing out there. Now, when it comes to camera bodies, there's a lot to unpack, and effectively it's a lot like cars. If you took a race car, it would be the most impractical thing to use to help your mate move, right? And it's the same with, if you took an off-roader, they're gonna be rubbish around a track compared to a sports car, right? So you need to find the right tool for the right job. So if you know that you're shooting automotive, there are certain things that are gonna matter, and there are certain things that aren't gonna matter. And it's the same with sports, and it's the same with wildlife, and it's the same with macro, it's the same with everything, okay? So do your research and find out what settings and what features matter to you the most, and then find out which cameras have the best of those features that you can afford. Now bear in mind that you're gonna have to buy your camera and your lenses and your bag and your memory cards and everything else. So just don't think about it as just your camera budget, think about it as your whole budget. But with all of that said, let's talk about what matters. So resolution is a big deal, in the fact that if you've got double the resolution, it means that you've got double the detail than you would have if you had half the resolution. Now, when is that actually gonna matter? And if you're only ever posting on social media, it really doesn't matter. 12 megapixels that phones have these days is more than enough. and pro cameras from 10 years ago were 20 megapixels. Okay, so you know, these days you've got sort of, you know, 45 megapixels, 50 megapixels, even 100 megapixels for things like the Fuji X100 and a bunch of others. So, but why would you need that much resolution? And the only real truth of it is you only need that much resolution if you're planning on printing your work big, and when it comes to prints as well, if your print is being viewed from a long way away, but it's going to be massive, it's the same as if you were viewing it much closer but much smaller. So like billboards, for example, could be like 8 megapixels and it wouldn't matter because the people viewing them are so far away. So it's to do with how big a print do you want to get and how close to it are the people who are going to see this print going to be. Now, there's a level of acceptableness to this, so you've got to define it for yourself, and you'll only know by going and getting some of your work printed. But the other time it matters is if you're going to crop into an image. So if you're shooting wider, knowing that you're going to crop into a smaller section of the photo, then the more resolution you have, the better. And knowing that you can crop a bit or a fair bit, and you're not going to lose the quality that you need for the particular project you're shooting, can give you more options. It means, oh, you know, I don't have to change to my wider lens, or I don't have to change my tighter lens. I can just shoot this wider and then crop in because I'm only delivering it at half the resolution that this camera is capable of. So knowing what your camera is capable of and what it can do will massively help you, but resolution sometimes matters, but more often than not it doesn't. And if you're posting to social media, it really doesn't, because it really doesn't matter. Okay guys, so this last one is about renting. Now, almost every photographer that I know has a list as long as their arm of gear that they would love to buy if they had an unlimited budget. And so everyone ends up in the same situation. You're trying to maximize the gear that you can get with the budget that you have, and sometimes those things aren't always matched up, right? For very few people. So you're always trying to get the maximum for the minimum. Now, if you're in any doubt as to whether or not a particular bit of gear is going to help you or just cost a lot of money and not actually help you get results, rent it. Find a rental shop that has exactly what you're after and go and rent it. And you'd be amazed at how much you can learn when you actually go and pick up a bit of kit and use it on a real shoot. And you'll find out from the results if it's worth whatever the price is, the investment in that gear for you. So if you're in any doubt, find a rental place and rent it. Right, so to sum up guys, does gear matter? Well, yes and no. And the answer I think for most photographers is gonna be not as much as you think it does, but it definitely does eventually. And the other thing is that you should bear in mind that the reason why photographers use the best gear isn't necessarily because they couldn't get really good results with less gear or minimal gear. It's that it makes it easier or faster for them. And once you start charging for your time and you're doing as many jobs as you can, and you're trying to balance your diary and your life and editing and everything else, something that saves you time might be as valuable to you as something that increases the quality of your actual photos. So as you get better and as you start taking on more and more jobs, you'll find that investing in stuff that helps you or makes your life easier or makes your job quicker will actually be something that you value as much as the latest and greatest lens or camera body. So I hope this has helped. I hope this has kind of given you some things to think about when it comes to gear and whether or not it's worth investing in a particular type of gear or not. And let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments about what you think is vital or what isn't, or you know what you'd like me to cover in terms of gear and what I would recommend at different levels or anything like that. Just let me know. If you've got questions, I'll do my best to answer them. If this has been useful for you, then do let me know. Drop me a like and subscribe for more. I've got a lot more planned and a lot more coming, and I'll see you in the next one.
Keep the healing.